We working? We live? Hello. Hi, how are you? I want to just do a quick intro. My name is Amy Sorrells. I work with Oracle, and I am part of the Oracle for Startups program. That's Oracle's initiative that we support startups across the globe, putting behind the resources of Oracle's technology, our product expertise, our marketing, even our customers to help grow startups across the globe. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the program, or more importantly, if you need a professional headshot done, and who doesn't need a new headshot, come see our booth. We're right upstairs, Oracle for Startups. We'd love to chat, say hi, or just see your smiling faces, get a new headshot for your social profile. So with that, I want to get started. We're here to talk about the F word. And I've been told that there's no cursing, but there could be a countdown for that. But just to get started, Zara, please introduce yourself.
My name is Zara Nanu. I'm CEO and founder of a company called Gap Square. We've set up the company to use technology to close the gender pay gap and help businesses create fair pay.
So I'm Jenny. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Snaptech. We're a visual search platform for retailers and for publishers, and we basically let people find products that they're looking at.
I'm Maren Bannon from Jane VC, and we are a new fund to invest in female-led startups in the US and Europe. And our vision is to invest in 200 female founders over the next decade.
Great. Can you guys hear us out there? No? Can you guys see if you can turn it up a bit? We'll try to speak as loudly as we can. We're going to keep going, though. Okay, just to quickly set the stage. I think we know that fundraising is at an all-time high. It's a lot of money to be had. Valuations are high across the board. Companies are staying private longer because there is so much money out there, and yet we still have that 2% figure that's just paltry amount of money going to women founders. So my question to you is, when are we going to see some real change with that? Maren, I want to go to you first. When are we going to see that 2% move to a substantial 20, 30, God forbid, 50%? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So can you all hear me? Okay. So I believe this is a change that's not going to happen overnight. I think it's going to take a decade to make this change. And I think it's not just having more women start companies, but it's more women in leadership positions, on boards. I personally think one of the most direct ways to make a change, though, is to have more female investors in check writing positions so they can actually make decisions about what things are funded in the future. And I think this is really important because I think it really dictates what is built. And technology really is the future. And so I think there's a lot of power in having a more diverse set of investors at the table deciding what's built next.
A decade. Okay, so we're going to get into some experiences that you two have had as founders. But what do you think about that? Is it going to take a decade, and what can we do?
I think it's going to take a decade or even more, because if you think about the funding gap, it's very similar to the gender pay gap. And in terms of the gender pay gap, the World Economic Forum is saying it will be 200 years before that is closed. The same World Economic Forum is saying that technology will help us build self-driving cars, change hospitals forever because of tech and healthcare, reach Mars by 2030, and yet in 2030 we're still meant to be about 200 years away from closing pay parity, and this is reflected equally in the funding gap. And the British Business Bank actually looked at VC funding last year in the UK, and to every £1 that was invested in the UK by VC funds last year, only 1p went to female founded businesses. 1p to every pound.
Jenny?
Yeah, I'm trying not to be too bleak, but I'm now 8 years into the startup journey, and I don't think I've really seen any movement at all in that period in the way that women are kind of perceived when it comes to fundraising. So yeah, I think your 10-year thing, I like to think it's not too optimistic because there is a bit more of a movement now behind wanting to solve this. I think 8 years ago people didn't really see it as a problem. So it's quite good now. There's a kind of open forum where we're able to talk about it. So fingers crossed that momentum will translate into results.
Yes, well, even small things like this, speaking about it, is going to help, right? So small bites at the apple. Maren, I want to talk a little bit. You wrote an excellent piece in Forbes that was entitled "The Biggest Bias in Tech That No One Talks About." So tell us about that bias, and then a little bit more about Jane VC and why you started it.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of attention on the gender bias issue and ethnicity. The bias that I wrote about in Forbes is actually age bias. And there's some interesting data on the fact that age bias in tech actually starts at 36. And also some data on the fact that funding really peaks. The amount of funding that entrepreneurs raise actually peaks around age 45. So tech is really a young industry. And I think because it's a lot of young people building things in tech, that dictates what is built. And I think, valet parking apps and private chef apps are great, but I think there are a lot of bigger problems out there that need to be solved that are addressing the needs of parents, of aging boomers. And so I think having more diversity of leaders within tech and investors within tech is so important for building that diverse range of things. And that's a lot of why we started Jane VC.
Yes, read that article. It's very insightful and it's very entertaining too. Very, very good stuff. Kind of sticking on articles. Jenny, you work in our program, so we work with you closely. You wrote a blog, which you're going to love this title. I'm an entrepreneur, a woman, and a kick-ass coder. So, but what was interesting is you revealed in that your experience with VCs, you were told you're not ambitious enough, you're too quiet to be a CEO. So, but yet you're successful. How do you get through those not so great comments and keep your confidence up to still stay true to you, who you are? What's some advice you can give on that?
I think having an incredibly thick skin is incredibly important, and also trying to not get angry about the comments, not accept them, but try and work out where they're coming from and why people are saying them. So actually the age point is really interesting. Of if you're a female founder, I'm 32, but I look about 12, which it turns out I'm hoping that in the future I appreciate this fact. At this precise moment in my life, it is not useful. But it's kind of being able to look at it from their point of view and go, right, what are these things that are giving them doubts? Why are they doubting my ability as a CEO and as a founder and all those kind of different things? And then work out how I can try and systematically prove them wrong in all of those things. So being quite open about my age and making a joke about it and trying to get the qualifications I need to actually say, okay, you think I'm quiet, but I'm intelligent, or try and kind of back a bit. And I think it's quite sad that we're in a position that we have to try so hard to prove ourselves when it shouldn't be our problem, it's someone else's bias. But I think knowing what you're dealing with, the prejudice that you are dealing with, and kind of facing it head on rather than letting it get you down is the way that I've managed to kind of get through it.
I think learning to not take things personally is key in every part of your life, but certainly as a founder, right? Zara, so you had an awesome tweet a couple of weeks ago that I was so entertained with. Tell the audience the context of the tweet and why it matters to this conversation today.
A couple of years ago, I pitched for funding in front of investors, and one of the VCs was on the panel because we run a company that is focused on the gender pay gap and closing the gender pay gap, said, this is not a business. You will never be able to make money out of it. This is politics. You should be in Westminster. Go and be a politician. Stop trying to be a businesswoman. We haven't raised money in that round, but actually continued to work at developing our product, taking the product to market, becoming sustainable, actually cash positive. And then I was invited a couple of weeks ago to Westminster to give evidence into a committee on workers and tech and share how the gender pay gap is going to evolve over the next 10 years and how governments should think about policy in light of this data. And my tweet was about how I was in Westminster, but I was there to give evidence as someone who's running a business and is gaining insights from other companies across the UK and sharing those with policymakers. So I put a tweet out saying, this is me in Westminster, this tweet is for the VC who said I should be doing politics. Equally going back to the question about bias is the fact I was in New York a couple of months ago on a female founders trade mission. And we met someone who's doing research at Columbia University around bias in pitching for investment. And they've analyzed pitches from Startup Grind from a few years to understand what the differences are between women pitching and men pitching. And actually turned out there's no difference between the pitches of the two genders. But the key difference was the kind of questions that investors then asked the founders. So what they found out is that actually men are being asked positive reinforcement questions, such as, how is this market going to grow in the next 5 years? Where's this market going in the next decade? Whereas female founders are being asked questions, defensive questions, where they have to defend themselves. How are you going to compete with your competitors? How are you going to make it in this tough space when you have others going for the same? So they analyzed this, and it was coming across both the UK and the US that this is the case. Even regardless of the gender of the investor, they still asked men positive reinforcement questions and women defensive questions. And their recommendation was for actually women to currently listen to those questions but answer them in a positive reinforcement kind of way. So when you get asked how are you going to compete with your competitors, don't answer how you're going to compete with your competitors. Answer how this market is growing in the next 5 years and where this market is going in the next 10 years. So that was quite insightful in terms of bias.
Yeah, this is something we've thought a lot about too in terms of what questions we're asking founders, and we've come up with this framework that has a consistent set of questions, which I think is important, but also a very positive, what's your big vision for this business? What does this look like if everything goes right? And making sure that we ask those type of questions, because I think it's such an important point.
Yep. That is a perfect transition, because I want to talk a little bit about relationships when you get into with your partner, your VC, your founder, because it is a relationship and it's more than just the dollars. There's a lot of intangibles, character, values. So, Maren, I've heard you talk about radical transparency in your company. What advice would you give founders, and what do you do yourself when you're talking about those questions you need to ask to really get to the core of this relationship and if you need to be in it?
Yeah, so that's a big value of ours is radical transparency, and it's about letting anyone pitch us, cold pitch us. You don't have to have a connection. It's about giving direct feedback about why we will invest or won't invest. I think for us, though, for me, when I'm meeting a founder, I really want to understand why they're building the business and what they want it to look like and what their vision of the world is. And I think that really helps me kind of understand who they are as a person.
Yep. Jenny, I want to ask you, what are you looking for in a partner? What are the characteristics that you should be looking for? And then I'm going to ask Zara the opposite, which are what are the red flags? What makes you run for the hills? But let's go for the positive.
I think finding an investor who loves your product as much as you do is really, really key, because I always say to founders when they're starting out, you're going to think about this every day for as long as you've got this company, so you've got to be in love with it. And you're kind of saying the same to your investors, is you're going to be seeing me once a month for the next 5 years. You've got to want that. So I think having that kind of chemistry with the actual investor, but then also knowing that they get your mission, they get what's driving you, and they also want to put in as much effort to make it work as you do. So obviously you're kind of on the front lines 24/7, but actually your board should be adding a lot of value around connections, ideas, help you problem solve. So looking for someone that does want to be hands-on rather than just capital.
Yep. How about the red flags? What makes you run?
Lack of commitment to the idea and to the vision of the company, or lack of support for the vision, I think is definitely a no-go.
And you probably sense that right away.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of mentors and mentorships. Maren, let's start with you. How does Jane VC approach mentorship, and how do you advise the founders in your portfolio to handle advice? Because we all want to hear advice and take advice, but there's that fine line of you can't listen to everything. You have to stay focused. What's the advice there?
Sure. So before starting Jane, I was a founder. So I've been in the founder's shoes, and I've gotten a lot of advice and a lot of mentors. And I found most of it isn't that helpful. And I think you have to have a really good filter in place. I generally don't think, so general mentorship I don't think is that beneficial for entrepreneurs. And what we do at Jane is try to make it really specific, targeted mentorship. So we have a really big expert network. And when founders have really specific needs or questions, we match them up to help with those specific things and make it more about solving day-to-day problems.
Jenny, do you have a mentor? If so, how do you work with them? And what's like the best piece of advice you've gotten pertaining to the VC world?
So I don't have like an official mentor. I've never sat down with someone and gone like, will you be my mentor, and been a bit creepy about it. I have probably kind of 3 to 5 people that I know I can call at any time and ask them like specific targeted things. So like, for instance, I've got someone on the VC side, I've got someone on the kind of technical side. So that's kind of how I've built my network over the years. I think the best advice I've had from a mentor, this is going to be tough. I think it's telling me to turn down stuff when it comes to VC. Like we had a deal come our way, this was 6 years ago, from a very well-known VC, and the terms were not great. And as a founder, you've got your head in the game constantly, so you're going, okay, I know the terms aren't great for me, but it'll be good for the company. And at that point, I called someone and they went, Jenny, you're going to have to live with this decision for 5, 10, 15 years. If it's not feeling right, don't do it. And that's something that's hard to tell yourself, but that's where mentors are really valuable, just having that external sanity check when you're in the madness.
How about you, Zara?
I'm a bit like Jenny in that I have a few people that I can call on to ask questions. And actually, being a founder and CEO can be a very lonely job. So it's very important to have those people that you can rely on to share the things that are really pressing on your shoulders and not letting you sleep at night. So it's good to have people like that you can call and you can have a meeting with and a cup of tea and who can tell you that it's going to be okay because everybody goes through the same stuff.
And speaking of mentorship, we're going to talk a little bit about failure because you can't talk about being a startup without talking about failure. So could each of you talk about the biggest mistake? We're going to start with you, Maren. The biggest mistake you've made and the lesson you learned from it so the audience can take that away.
Yeah, so the thing that pops to mind for me is actually not part of my tech career. It was actually growing up, I was a competitive tennis player, spent pretty much every waking moment playing tennis. And I blew out my shoulder when I was 15 and had surgery, and my tennis career was completely done. And I think, that's a kind of almost a silly story to tell, except for the fact that it taught me to fail, and it taught me that I could always reinvent myself and recover. And I think having that experience early in my life was really impactful for me.
How about you, Jenny?
I think it's taking so long to get started. So I wrote the initial algorithms behind the company in 2008. I launched the company in 2011. So I had 3 years of sheer blind panic going, surely someone like Google or Microsoft or Oracle are going to build this. Why is it going to be me? So I think kind of learning how to combat the imposter syndrome side of things and have a bit more self-belief, that's what I've had to learn over the years to get over that one.
Especially when a VC tells you you're not ambitious enough. That would work there. Zara?
I have a little bit of a different relationship with failure in that I love failure because I learn so much from failure. It's the biggest teacher for me. So I try to actually spot things where I fail on a regular basis. So that's what helps me grow, and that's what helps me bounce. It's like that saying, fall over 7 times, get up 8. That's what failure does to me.
Right, and isn't it just like changing your perspective? It's hard to learn to take it as a learning lesson, but when you do, you're just getting better, right? And that's hard. Like, how do you coach your founders on that?
Yeah, I think in Silicon Valley, I've spent most of my career in San Francisco, and I think there, when you fail, people say, what are you going to start next? And I think that having more of that mindset in Europe would be really beneficial, having more acceptance of failure and more just, everyone fails and just move on to the next thing or figure out a way to recover.
We're going to take Maren, I'm going to ask you to read the first question. Can you, because I can't see it from here.
The first question is, do you have any practical tips on how to combat the imposter syndrome?
Can one of you guys take that?
I can go with that. Actually, I have again a different take on it. There was an article in The Atlantic a couple of months ago that was published by Google and Harvard University, and they looked at women's confidence in work in tech companies in the Silicon Valley. And the issue that came out strongly out of that research is that women were not lacking the confidence or not necessarily having imposter syndrome as much as they've learned over time that they get penalized for it, and therefore they were learning how to not show it. Because they've learned that showing confidence and showing that you're confident in yourself actually is being misinterpreted, and therefore they were being penalized in employment. So that's my different take on the imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I think for me, I honestly find it a little bit healthy to have a bit of it. Otherwise, you're going to feel untouchable. But I always try and take a step back and think about what's happened in my journey over the past month, 6 months, a year. Because it's very hard to be swept up and think it's normal. But sometimes if you take a step back and go hang on, one of the biggest tech companies in the world asked me on stage to speak about X, Y, and Z. Sometimes looking outside of what you think about yourself to seeing what other people are asking you to do because they respect you, really helps kind of reset that balance.
This is an interesting question. Do you think we should publicly name or shame those who do not help with the equality issue here? And if so, will that do more harm than good? Maren, you want to start with that?
Sure. So I personally don't. I think it's much better to celebrate the people who are doing great things and just encourage them and celebrate what they're doing. And a big reason behind this for me is I think we should just be positive about the issue instead of complaining about it. There's so much negative energy and I think about the issue, especially of gender and tech. But the other reason is I think it's a huge opportunity to invest in women. They're not getting the capital that they should, and I think there's all this female talent that's waiting to be unharnessed. And so I'm happy to be focused on it, and if other people don't want to be, that's fine with me.
And another question from the crowd. Any idea on how to increase the number of female investors? Zara, we'll let you take that, although Maren, you could take it as well.
You go. Such a difficult one. It's about funds really starting to think outside the box when they recruit people into those roles. And actually, Diversity VC just ran a program in the UK where they recruited a number of people who were interested to do internships at VC funds to learn more. And I think they've really managed to increase the number of diversity within those internships. And they had more than 50% women, and they had a diverse range of ethnic backgrounds. So it's really encouraging to see initiatives like that promote the sector to different genders and ethnicities.
And we have to wrap it up, but I want to ask you ladies to give one just closing thought to the audience here. Any piece of advice as you go on? Maren, we'll start with you, and Jenny, then Zara.
So I think it's really good that we're having like an open dialogue around some of the challenges facing female founders, but I'd say don't let these kind of dialogues put you off. They're here because we need to be talking about it as a society, but if you're a woman with a great business idea who's always wanted to start it, don't let the fact that we only get 2% of funding put you off. Be one of that 2% and actively try and drive it from the inside.
Yeah, like I said earlier, be the person who falls down 7 times and gets up 8, because this is what running a startup is all about.
So I think that the next decade's unicorns are going to be built by a different set of founders. I think they're going to be more diverse in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of geography. And I'm really excited to see what these founders build. I think it's going to be a really interesting set of companies, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks, guys.